What really happened to Corporal Garrison the night he fell from Buckingham Palace's East Wing in 1967? Why do modern guards still salute a window that's been empty for over 50 years? And what did one young sentry find hidden in the stone that made the legend feel all too real? Watch the window. See the figure in red, still, silent, watching. But what happens next will leave you wondering who's really standing guard. Now, before we reveal the full story, first, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. You wouldn't know it standing in the middle of Buckingham Palace's courtyard at night. But there are things that live in the silence here, stories, glances, the kinds of warnings passed between men who've taken vows never to speak while on duty. Private Nathan Morgan hadn't been stationed long. Just a few months into his first year as a ceremonial guard, he'd already learned to keep his jaw clenched, spine straight, and eyes locked into that blank, unreadable middle distance. But what they don't teach in training is what the old-timers pass on when no one else is listening. It started with a look. His rotation partner, a lance corporal from Yorkshire, tapped him twice on the shoulder before stepping off post. Not unusual. But then, as he turned to leave, the corporal paused and gave a slow, deliberate glance toward one of the upper palace windows on the eastern side. Then he saluted it. Not high, not formal, just a crisp tilt of the hand toward a window that was dark and empty. Or so Nathan thought. He didn't ask questions, not that night. But later, back in the barracks, he brought it up quietly, over tea and locker room silence. "Why'd you salute that window?" he asked. The older guard didn't answer right away, just kept wiping condensation off his canteen with the edge of a towel. Finally he said, "Some of us still do. Out of respect." "For who?" Another pause. "Garrison." "Was that his rank?" "No," the man said quietly. "That was his name." Nathan frowned. "What happened to him?" The corporal looked up then, just once. "He died on post. 1967. Some say accident, some say otherwise." That was all he'd say. But once you start listening for things, it's amazing what you hear. A whisper between changing shifts. A page of record-keeping mysteriously misfiled. The fact that no one is ever assigned solo guard duty near the East Wing window after dusk. At least, not anymore. It wasn't in the handbook, but every man who served more than a season seemed to know about it. The 1967 Enigma, they called it. Half joke, half warning. Most guards said it was nothing. Just a story. Just a name. But then came the night Nathan saw him. It was just after 11 p.m. He was walking back along the north corridor, eyes scanning the windows like always, when he noticed movement in the eastern wing. One window, just one, was lit with a strange low glow, and in it stood a figure in red. Unmoving, tall, white gloves at his side, face obscured by shadow. He froze, blinked, looked again. The window was dark. He said nothing that night. But the next morning, over inspection, he turned to the oldest man in their rotation and asked a simple question. "Who was Corporal Garrison?" The man gave a long sigh, then said, "Come with me," and began to tell him the story. July 4th, 1967. Buckingham Palace stood under an unusually oppressive sky. Thick clouds rolling in off the Thames, smothering the heat that had lingered for days. The stone courtyards felt heavier that week, not from weather alone, but from something unspoken drifting through the ranks. Corporal Lyle Garrison had served 12 years in the Coldstream Guards. A quiet man, mid-30s, dark-eyed with the sharp posture of someone who believed in the rules he followed. Born to a military family, his father had once stood watch during Churchill's funeral. Lyle was the kind of soldier who never asked for recognition. He polished his boots until they gleamed, pressed his tunic until it looked sewn onto his frame, and kept his eyes forward. But that summer, something in him had changed. He wasn't slouching, wasn't skipping protocol, but there was a tension behind the silence now. The way he held his breath slightly too long, the way his eyes would linger on doors after they closed. He had started requesting night rotations, formally at first, then quietly with favours, always volunteering to guard the East Wing near the restricted archive hall. One evening in June, he was spotted speaking, briefly and very discreetly, with a man outside the main gate, a civilian in a grey coat. Most assumed it was family, but a lieutenant later recognised the man as Alan Drewer, a known investigative journalist with a knack for sniffing around the wrong places. That same week, Lyle had approached Captain Mercer, one of the administrative officers assigned to Palace Logistics. What was said in that short meeting was never recorded, but those who saw it said Mercer emerged pale, lips pressed into a tight line. A fellow guardsman, Private Holden, later remembered that conversation too. I asked him what he was looking for, Holden would say years later, and he told me proof. Just that, proof. Said he couldn't turn a blind eye forever. At the time, nobody pressed further, but Lyle knew something, or believed he did. Word began to spread, quietly, that he had seen a document during a misfiled manifest review, a shipment schedule bearing palace-level signatures and coded authorizations, tied to an arms consignment routed through West Africa. The kind of deal that wasn't supposed to exist, especially not with the regime in question. Rumours, nothing more. That's how the senior officers treated it. But Lyle had started taking notes, writing things down in a slim brown notebook he kept inside his dress coat. Never left it in his locker, carried it everywhere. He'd grown increasingly restless, even anxious, but never broke protocol. Only once did he speak out of turn, whispering to Private Holden on a foggy rotation changeover, "If I don't come off shift one night, tell them to look inside the vent behind the third bench in the East Courtyard." Holden thought it was a joke, just another one of Garrison's stoic crypticisms. Then came July 6th. Lyle was posted on solo overnight duty in the East Wing. The exact route he'd requested, same window, same shadowed halls, no issues logged, weather calm, no disturbance reported. But when morning inspection arrived at 0600 hours, Corporal Garrison was nowhere to be found. They discovered him just 20 minutes later in the interior corner of the East Courtyard, face down, gloves off, uniform tunic carefully folded beside him on the stone. Pronounced dead at the scene. Official cause: accidental fall from an upper-level gallery. No note. No visible trauma beyond the fatal impact. No signs of struggle. No investigation. The official record would state possible momentary loss of balance. But something was off. The belt had been removed and folded with ceremonial care, not hurried panic. The logbook was missing from his coat pocket. And when they went to check the ventilation shaft behind the third bench in the East Courtyard, it had been sealed with new screws. No one asked questions after that. The matter was closed. But inside the barracks, the whispers began, and Lyle Garrison's name would never leave them. The official announcement came less than 6 hours after the discovery. A short, clipped memo circulated through internal military channels. Corporal Lyle Garrison, Coldstream Guards, deceased during overnight rotation, accidental fall. No further details, no funeral honours, no internal investigation. The file was marked as routine fatality, case closed, except it wasn't. Not for the guards who knew him, and not for the few officers who understood just how out of character the details truly were. There was no reason for Garrison to be on the upper gallery where he supposedly fell. That section hadn't been in his assigned patrol for the evening. The area was sealed to ceremonial units for the night, due to a scheduled repainting of interior trim. Only palace staff with special clearance had access. And yet, that's where his body was found, 2 stories below the locked gallery. Then there was the tunic, neatly folded, set down beside the body with care, sleeves aligned, brass buttons gleaming despite the dew. The kind of fold drilled into guards during training, done with focus, with purpose. If someone were panicking or suicidal, why stop to fold a uniform like that? His gloves were placed on top. White, spotless, ritualistic almost. Even the coroner's report, while brief, noted the lack of defensive wounds and the absence of obvious trauma aside from the impact. Garrison had hit the ground flat, without signs of bracing or twisting, a dead-weight fall with arms by his sides. Back in the barracks, his locker was cleaned out by the quartermaster within 24 hours. His notebook, always kept inside his coat, was missing. Private Holden tried asking about it. I wanted to say something, he recalled later. Just ask where it went. But when I brought it up to Captain Mercer, he told me to drop it. Said, "You want to keep your commission? Let the dead rest." Something about that sentence lingered in Holden's mind. Let the dead rest. But Lyle hadn't rested. Not in the way the story should have ended. Because within days, the tension inside the unit became unbearable. One of the lance corporals, Frederick Ames, abruptly requested a transfer, not just to a different post, but out of ceremonial duty altogether. He cited family reasons, but a fellow guardsman said he'd been seen crying quietly in the locker room the night before. The same week, 2 others requested leave. One of them had been on the same rotation as Garrison during his final shift. He wouldn't speak about it, just packed and left. Palace staff who worked the East Corridor reported seeing a uniformed man near the archive stairwell, always standing, always silent, never found during checks. One steward, an older man named Ellis, quit after a week. He left a single sentence in his resignation note: "I'm not walking past that window again." Meanwhile, Garrison's family received a tightly managed condolence package, a folded flag, a letter from the Ministry of Defence. No official inquest, no ceremony, no press notice. The journalist he had spoken to, Alan Drewer, was picked up days later on suspicion of espionage. No charges were filed, but he was released with a warning and his home searched. Whatever files he had been gathering on Palace operations were seized. No one connected the dots in public. No one could prove there were dots to connect. But inside Wellington Barracks, the truth had already become something else entirely. A myth. A warning. A figure, still in full dress red, spotted just after midnight near the east window. A presence reported by 2 sentries who never spoke to each other, yet described the same details. White gloves, tall hat, eyes shadowed, silent, motionless, gone within seconds. It didn't become official protocol, but from that year on, no single sentry was ever assigned the East Courtyard during overnight shifts, and a quiet ritual began. Not enforced, not spoken aloud, just understood. Every man in rotation, upon passing the far east window, whether dusk or dawn, would offer a silent salute. Some out of superstition, others out of guilt, but most out of respect for a corporal who had once tried to warn them and died doing it. The first sighting wasn't treated like one. 3 months after Corporal Garrison's death, during a particularly cold October rotation, Private Ellis Hartley reported something unusual in the logbook. Not dramatic, not sensational, just one clean line scrawled in steady handwriting. Unidentified figure, in ceremonial uniform, seen standing at East Arch window, 0342 hours. It was filed, not flagged. No one followed up. But 3 days later, a second guard, Lance Corporal Birch, logged nearly the same thing, worded differently. Observed uniformed man in static position near interior gallery window. No movement. Disappeared when approached. This time, Captain Mercer had the window area swept. No personnel were found. No entry logs showed movement. The security staff, all civilian that night, had nothing on camera because the East Wing's internal hallway still used shadow-pulled curtains, with no surveillance facing out. A week later, Private Hartley collapsed during duty. fainted outright at 0410 hours, found unconscious near the northern wall. When questioned, he hesitated before saying it out loud. He was standing there again. Same place, same posture. Watching. Hartley left the guard within a month, transferred quietly, without formal ceremony. Word spread fast inside the barracks, and though no one wanted to speak about it openly, the atmosphere around the eastern window began to shift. No one wanted the overnight post near that section. One guard began carrying a rosary tucked in his glove. Another started whispering a single line under his breath on each pass, "Rest where you fell." A former grenadier rotated in for 2 weeks and refused to take night duty after just one shift. No explanation offered. And then came the tradition. It didn't start with an order. There was no directive, no acknowledgement, just a motion, a single quiet salute. It was Sergeant Colin Rourke who did it first, an older man who had served with Garrison back in '62. On his first return to the palace grounds since his friend's death, Rourke walked past the east window, paused, turned and saluted. Not for anyone to see, not for display, just for him. Someone saw it, then someone else. Within weeks, every man in rotation had picked it up. By the end of the month, it was a silent tradition, passed through generations, new guards mimicking what they saw without ever being told why. If you asked them about it, they'd shrug. Just showing respect. Custom, I guess. Old habit. No one would say the name, but they all knew it. Garrison. It became part of the oral folklore of the guard, not in public. Never in front of officers, but in the locker room, during boots-off hours, in low whispers under flickering lights. Don't disrespect the window. Don't turn your back to it after midnight. He never left. He's still standing post. The sightings kept coming. Sporadic, never confirmed, but always similar. Always the same figure, scarlet tunic, white gloves, tall frame, standing in full ceremonial stance. Face mostly obscured, never moving, never speaking. Some said they only saw the shape. Others swore they saw a flicker of eyes behind the shadows. One guard claimed the figure raised his hand in a mirrored salute just once and then vanished. But there was never any panic. That's what made it so different from ghost stories you'd hear elsewhere. No screams, no threats, no tricks. Just silence, stillness, duty. It was as if the man hadn't died at all, as if something unfinished had tethered him here, not for revenge, but for responsibility, for unfinished watch. One of the few records kept unofficially came from a steward, an elderly man named Kenneth Watts, who'd worked palace interiors since 1949. He was known for his quiet manners and steel trap memory. In 1971, he wrote a personal account to his daughter before retiring. "I've seen him 3 times. Always same posture, never threatening, just present. He looks like he's standing for someone who forgot to finish their shift, like he's waiting to be relieved, but no one comes." When Watts died a few years later, the letter was found folded beneath his medals. It never made the news. None of it did, because nobody wanted scandal. But more importantly, nobody wanted to disturb something that felt sacred. And so the salutes continued. A moment of respect for the guard, who never stepped off post, who, in death, became part of the structure itself, stitched into the walls of Buckingham Palace, like the stitching in the red wool of his tunic. And those who saw him, they didn't call him a ghost, they called him Garrison. And they stood still a little longer after passing that window, just in case he was still watching. Nathan Morgan hadn't meant to stay late. His shift was over, boots unbuckled and coat unbuttoned, but something in him refused to leave the barracks just yet. The story had gotten under his skin. He wasn't superstitious. He didn't believe in ghosts, not really. But the way the older guards spoke of Garrison, not as a rumour, but almost as a fellow colleague still on rotation, left him curious in a way he couldn't ignore. And so, just before midnight, he quietly made his way back across the palace forecourt. The air was unusually still. No wind, no noise. The kind of silence that settles over centuries-old stone when everyone else has gone. He positioned himself near the opposite side of the east courtyard. From here, he could see the window, the one they all saluted. At first, nothing, just darkness. He checked his watch. 23:47. The window looked the same as it always had. Black glass framed by old limestone with decorative ironwork curling across the sill. And then the light changed. It didn't flicker on like a bulb. It was more like a shift. A faint amber glow from inside, like candlelight in a room no one had entered. And in that glow, the silhouette emerged, tall, upright, a red ceremonial tunic, white gloves, broad shoulders, still. Nathan froze, breath catching in his throat. Every instinct screamed to turn away, but he didn't. He stood at attention. Not because anyone ordered him to, but because it felt wrong not to. The figure didn't move, didn't acknowledge. Just stood, watching the courtyard, as if posted on watch the same as anyone else. Nathan blinked, and the figure was gone. The light inside the window faded just as slowly as it had come. He didn't run, didn't panic. He simply walked forward toward the window, toward the low iron grate that ran along the base of the eastern facade. That's when he saw it. Something tucked between the bars, barely visible in the dim light. He crouched and gently pulled it free, a small, worn piece of brass, no bigger than a dog tag. The lettering was faded, but still legible. C.P.L. Garrison. No serial number, no unit code, just a name. And on the back, etched faintly into the metal, a phrase, "Still on post." Nathan stood, heart pounding, unsure what to do. This wasn't something you turned in to lost property. At sunrise, during morning inspection, he approached Warrant Officer Hensley, one of the oldest serving guards in the rotation, a man who had once served with Coldstream veterans from the 1970s. Rumour was, Hensley had seen the window glow more than once himself. Nathan waited until the others had moved on, then stepped forward and opened his palm. The tag sat there, brass dulled with age. Hensley didn't flinch, didn't ask where it came from. He simply took it, looked down for a long moment, then closed his hand around it. "You're not the first to find it," he said softly. "What does it mean?" Nathan asked. Hensley looked up at the window, then at Nathan. "It means you're watching too now," he said, "and that's all he ever wanted." He turned, walked off toward the inner archway. Nathan stood alone for a moment longer, staring at the window. The light wasn't there anymore, but the silence felt different now, less empty. More like someone was standing beside him, and from that day forward he did what the others did. On every night rotation, every East Courtyard pass, he saluted the window, not out of fear, but out of duty, the kind that never really ends, even after death. The next night, Private Nathan Morgan stepped into his rotation early. He was scheduled for the North Corridor, but after speaking with Warrant Officer Hensley, no one questioned the quiet shift that placed him on the East Courtyard route instead. The moon was full that evening, casting a silver glaze over the wet stones. The palace windows reflected everything and nothing, just like they always had. Nathan marched his pattern in silence. No footsteps echoed except his own. When he approached the east window, he slowed slightly, not breaking formation, just enough to mark the moment. Then, like so many before him, he stopped briefly, turned toward the dark glass, and raised his hand in a crisp salute. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't for show, it was quiet, personal, a message. "I see you?" No light appeared, no figure stood watch, but the air felt different, charged but not heavy, as if the space was aware of him, as if he was no longer the only one on post. Across the courtyard, another guard turned the corner, an older sergeant. Nathan nodded as they passed, and the sergeant, without prompting, saluted the window too. No words exchanged, just ritual, and that was the truth behind it all. The legend of Corporal Lyle Garrison wasn't kept alive by fear. It wasn't ghost stories or flickering shadows or whispered dread. It was duty. Garrison had died trying to uphold something that went deeper than paperwork, deeper than policy. He'd seen something that didn't sit right, something that betrayed the trust every soldier is asked to carry, and he refused to look away. And when no one listened, he stayed, not to haunt, but to watch, to remind them that standing still doesn't mean being silent, that ceremonial service doesn't mean blindness, that even the guards the world sees as motionless statues are men of principle underneath the wool and brass. And in the heart of that tradition, there was a lesson passed down from one silent guard to the next. The duty doesn't end when the uniform comes off. So the salutes continued. The window remained untouched. The tag was never spoken of again. But every night, under that eastern arch, men paused, just briefly, to remember the one who never left. On his next leave, Nathan visited the Coldstream archives. He didn't ask for much, just one file. It was missing, of course. But before he left, the clerk at the desk handed him a photocopy someone had quietly preserved, a rotation sheet from July 5th, 1967. Lyle Garrison's name, listed next to a section that had been scribbled over. Someone had tried to erase it, but not well enough. And under the smudge, still barely legible in pencil, Interior East. Classified. Nathan folded the paper and placed it in his breast pocket. When he returned to post the following morning, he stood a little straighter, held his breath a little longer, focused his eyes into that infinite distance guards are trained to find, but this time with something else behind it. Not just presence, witness. That's what Garrison had become. Not a ghost. A witness who never blinked. And when Nathan passed the east window again that night, he didn't expect to see anything. But he saluted anyway and said, just once under his breath, "Rest easy, Corporal. We're still watching too." Do you believe Corporal Garrison died by accident? Or was he silenced for what he tried to expose? And if you were in his position, would you have kept the secret or stood your ground? Drop your thoughts in the comments. We read every single one. If this story gave you a new way to see what tradition and quiet duty really mean, give it a like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss a single post. Share this with someone who still thinks these guards are just here for show. And if you're still with us, check out the next story on your screen now. It just might change how you see everything behind the red. We'll see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. With another story that still stands tall.